All right, I'm here with V. Schmidt. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm V. Most of you know me as someone that's very passionate about cardiac medical devices or all medical devices now. I just recently got a complete cyborg overhaul, like the leads and device got replaced, so I am good to go and now sport the latest in firmware as well as technology.
That's awesome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what your cyborg device is?
So I have an internal cardiac device that does dual treatments for me. So it deals with my very super slow, lazy heart rate, as well as when it decides that it's going on a rave and like a scroll with acid and just having fun, it puts it back into where it needs to be. I've been a cyborg since the age of 19, kind of been actively working in the biohack industry and research for the last 5 years.
And what kind of work do you do?
So I'm currently actually a professor, or assistant professor at North University in Norway, where I specifically teach digital forensics and incident response, as well as medical device forensics to bachelor students.
Oh, that's awesome. You're really like working to shape the next generation.
Definitely. I mean, after years of law enforcement, it kind of, you have to pass the proverbial torch to those that are going to run into the future with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like kind of dovetails really well with what I was really hoping to ask you about your talk for DEF CON this year. So it's Breathless, a tall tale of a CPAP machine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about like what I feel like I could expect so many things?
So my dad has got obstructive sleeping disorder where he needs a CPAP machine to actually help him sleep better. And being part of digital forensics and doing incident response, as well as being a very proud hacker, I wanted to know, well, okay, so how does this device work? How can I best support my dad? Just because we know medical devices aren't traditionally built with security in mind. But yeah, hacking things is one thing and it's super fun. But I like to fix things and I like to investigate things, right? So I want to know, well, what is recorded on the device? How does it work? So I started, taking forensic images of his device and looking at the data, how it's stored, and kind of developed what I call my medical device forensics process. And I've just been applying it to different devices. But this year I wanted to shake it up and not do something in the cardiac space and showcase some of the forensic work that I've done on looking at these devices.
That's super interesting. What are some of the interesting things or like unexpected things you found by applying this like forensic framework to medical devices?
That it's actually quite simple to look at the forensics of a medical device. We think they are super sexy devices, and let's face it, they are. But kind of underneath the shell, when you peel off the layers, you find operating systems, you find hardware that inevitably it does still apply some normal computing concepts. So my medical device forensic process looks at kind of the engineering side of things. So how do we fault find? How do we determine a device is optimally working? So looking more from an engineering perspective, but then using digital forensics to do the acquisitions, preservation, time analysis, and reconstruction of data. Mm-hmm. And then putting some, medical forensics in it that you can look at the health and what was recorded on the medical side, and kind of putting it all together to get this holistic view of what was going on with the device and the patient it was connected to.
So for the average person using these devices, probably they're not thinking about security, and they're probably not thinking about like what is happening with their information. Like, is there anything that you would like to share with somebody who's maybe using these devices and just has never, ever considered what you're talking about? Like, what's at stake for them?
So I think the most difficult decision that any patient faces, right, and I've faced this numerous times every time I get a new device, because they don't last forever, is, well, okay, what's going to go wrong with this device? But, a wise person once said to me, well, what I can tell you is that, yes, all devices have got flaws and vulnerabilities. It's kind of something we need to be comfortable with. They're built by humans, so we make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. But kind of the certainty is there that without these devices, clinically, you might die. I mean, there was a choice for me: either get a device that I know has got problems on, and live with those risks associated with it, or I face the inevitability that my heart will succumb to what condition I have and inevitably cut my life short. So I think we need to become, again, very comfortable with a vulnerable medical device, because they are there, they will forever be there, and it's not something that we can build a perfect system for. So patients should ask questions. We're all often afraid to push the boundaries with the medical physicians and say, hey, wait, before we go ahead, let's have a conversation about my data, the privacy of my data. Nowhere do we opt in to having our data uploaded and disclosed and things like that, or even used. So I think as a patient, ask the questions, push the boundaries, your body, your rules. That's kind of what I would say. Is it's not so much about the vulnerable device, but you need to make informed decisions.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I really like what you said about getting comfortable with the idea that these things are going to happen anyway, because I feel like that is much more achievable than trying to like change the whole world. What kinds of things, like I feel like people who are just like trying to learn about this, like things that they kind of gravitate towards are like really tangible examples of like what happens if your data gets out, like what is really like at risk here if your data is vulnerable, like what would provoke someone to ask these questions to their medical provider instead of just saying like, well, my data will be somewhere and so what? Like why would people care about this issue?
I think it goes about the data is used often for nefarious purposes. You know, when private data or personal identifiable health data or, is taken, it kind of is a very intimate amount of what's going on with your system that can be abused. Now it becomes interesting with geographical things because we're always so US centered. We forget about places like Africa, where I'm from. We forget about places like Scandinavia, where I live now. They've all got different privacy rules. But I think the interesting perspective is whose data is the data that's recorded on a medical device. It's recording my heartbeat, but I don't have access to that data. I don't have the ability to pull analytics or know what's going on with my device. It's not really actually my data, if you think about it. It should be my data, but we don't opt in. As I said to you, you have a device, the data is uploaded, it's sent to your doctor, they've got access to it, but we never opt in to say, use our data. But it can be used for various nefarious situations, especially if someone's trying to become you or abuse it to get medication. I'm thinking like it's internal brain stimulators that work for pain, to manage pain. If someone obtains those kind of clinical data, can they use it to, get drugs? Potentially. But it also depends on where you are, because HIPAA, GDPR, POPI Act, they're very different in what they cover. So privacy is a big thing. And I think patients should have the ability to opt in or opt out.
I think one of the interesting things that you bring up is like this access to your own data in like combination with the idea of like safety. So obviously at Biohacking Village, we talk a lot about citizen science and what we can do with our own data. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like what could someone do with their own data? And should I be able to have all the access to all my own data?
So my physician friends are probably not going to find me popular at the moment, but, I sometimes feel like physicians make us out to be these sensitive creatures that shouldn't have access to data because we automatically going to panic and, have our heads on fire. Now, 4 years ago, I had a device that failed. My doctor didn't believe me because the device was, in engineering perspectives, testing properly. But I had a lead that actually broke, and we didn't pick it up until we were doing other tests and the fluoroscopy. But it took me having to do data analytics on my Apple Watch to show that the heart rate, how my heart rate, measuring 60 beats a minute, which is quite normal, to then all of a sudden 41, which is really bad. And my device wasn't kicking it back up to 65, or when it was going at 140. But again, I had to go into the doctor's office and convince him that I wasn't crazy. I am a little crazy, but not when it comes to my health stuff. But I had to convince him that, hey, something is wrong. Data doesn't lie. And that still wasn't enough because he wasn't familiar with Apple monitors and how it takes the heart rates and things like that because it was fairly new. And then I said to him, well, let's do a very old school test, which we monitor the data that's not the device's data, and we see which one of the 3 data points is out. And the device was out. The watch as well as the monitors were accurate. And that led to a whole replacement of a lead and a device. Mm-hmm. Now, had I not known that, I don't know how many times it would have been resuscitated. There was 3 hospital stays, 2 resuscitations, and it was not a good time for anyone. Mm-hmm. So I feel patients should be allowed to have autonomy over their bodily statistics. I mean, then I can know that if I go walk 5 kilometers and my heart rate is telling me, okay, it doesn't look very good for you. Your device has been going off multiple times. Maybe walking 5 kilometers a day isn't a good thing for my heart condition. I can then start managing my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that we should have integration where I can be having statistics with my Apple iWatch of my cardiac device to know what's going on. It's intimate, it's there, it's connected to my heart. So I understand physicians don't want people to do medical diagnoses. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm simply asking to know what is happening with my body, how my device is responding, and whether or not anything I do in a day aggravates my situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about like having to be your own advocate sometimes, and you know what's going on in your body, and you're the only person who can like do all these checks and balances at some level. Nobody's as invested as you are in your own heart, right? So if you could share like a call to action to the biohacking village community and like generally like the community that might be watching this, like what kind of call to action would you give?
Well, there's a couple. Firstly, the hacking side, the red teaming side of things is awesome. It's sexy. We all want to do it. But I want to challenge you, and I kind of issue this challenge every year, that if you find a vulnerability and you've disclosed it, but also come up with a solution, a proposed solution, no matter how crazy it sounds. Some of the greatest solutions to complex problems have been the weirdest, strangest things that have come in. I mean, I've come up with some things that people said was impossible, and in the end of the day, it was a silly thing that just came to mind and it worked. But it's not just about finding problems, it's about solving problems and building things better and working with manufacturers to make it better. And just because they close the door doesn't mean you can kick open a window and crawl through. I mean, that's also an option. I have been lucky that after 2 years of a very turbulent relationship, my manufacturer that I'm with, Medtronic now, we kind of have a good working relationship. But that took years to foster. Just because they say no once doesn't mean you shouldn't annoy them until they say yes. Mm-hmm. And then I want patients to know that they have a voice. They have a right to bodily autonomy. They have a right to say, I don't want that manufacturer in my body because X, Y, and Z. Or I don't want that specific device because if I go back to South Africa, it's not approved for use there. And I think even though doctors, might interrupt you, I think there's a study that says within the first 25 seconds, a patient is interrupted by a physician, doesn't mean that you should back off. It's your body. You're the one that pays the ultimate price if you don't get the clinical help you need. And second opinions are not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love like thinking about how to think laterally and solve these problems, because some of these problems are problems because we're thinking the same way, right? And because everyone's trained to think the same way. And I think that's like an avenue that patients really have to intervene. Like we're not always trained the exact same way as doctors. Might be thinking about things differently, like hackers also thinking about things differently, right? And that's like what makes us stronger. Yeah, do you have anything else you want to share? It's been so great to hear your opinion.
Think about a medical device as just a fancy computer and try and identify kind of what the hardware components are. Then try and identify what the file system is, what firmware is being used, what software is being used, how it communicates. Start breaking down those building blocks into things that you know. But also, OSINT in this is an amazing thing. If you're a patient and you want to know more about your device, there are, public accessible things you can go look at, but do your homework. I always say I support a manufacturer that owns their mistakes and fixes them, rather than saying, oh, well, the patient just has to do X, Y, and Z to mitigate by, transferring the risk. So go read up about it. If you see something in the news outlets or on Homeland, where it is the device is hacked with like 3 strokes of a key, do go do your homework, because I almost feel like I should start a Mythbusters medical device edition where we just debunk what Hollywood is doing.
I would watch that. That would be awesome.
Because I think these devices save lives. I mean, I would have been dead at 19, let's face it. If I didn't get my device, I wouldn't be here today. So I think it extends your life quite significantly. So I think there's a use for it, but we need to start becoming comfortable with having problems and owning them and fixing them. It's not something that we can transfer onto someone else.
Yeah, for sure. I love the angle of putting the power in patients. I don't think people consider that they have or consider the breadth of options that they could have when like a physician tells them they need to have like a medical device implanted, right? It seems like such a daunting task to even like consider. But when you break it down like you did, you have like different things that we know of. We know of like hardware pieces, we know of operating systems. We can like break these things down into like bite-sized pieces that feel way less scary. I'm super excited to hear your talk, and also for your upcoming medical device Mythbusters show that I am absolutely on board for. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me, and I'm always a big supporter of biohack. And if there's anyone that wants to know more about forensics and exactly how it's done, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, or my website, and then we can have a conversation. I'm all for sharing is caring. And you can blame my talk on Jay Ratcliffe, because he's the one that gave me my first CPAP image that made me very inquisitive as to what was going on my dad's device.
Oh, that's so good to hear other biohackers creating new biohackers. Well, thank you. And yeah, it was great to chat.
Thanks, Lee.